There's a pattern in history that has rewritten money itself, over and over again. In 1580, Spain controlled silver flows worth more than 60% of global supply, and within a century its currency collapsed under its own weight. In 1945, Britain still ruled a quarter of the world's population, but by 1967 the pound was devalued overnight, wiping out savings across the empire. In August 1971, the United States closed the gold window, ending Bretton Woods in a single weekend and permanently changing what money meant. Different centuries, different powers, same outcome. And right now, in 2025, a coalition representing over 40% of the world AS population and nearly 30% of global GDP is following the exact same pattern. And here's what should terrify you. When monetary systems break, they don't break politely. They break fast, unevenly, and without warning. This is the story of if BRICS succeeds, your money changes forever, and why history says we've seen this ending before. Before we go through this pattern, you need to understand what a global monetary shift actually means. Not in textbooks, in practice. This isn't just about trade agreements or new currencies. It's about who gets to print value, who gets to borrow cheaply, and who absorbs the pain when the system finally snaps. At first, nothing feels different. Prices still work. Markets still open. The headlines sound technical and distant. But then the consequences arrive all at once. Confidence breaks before systems do. Money, which only works because everyone believes in it, begins to change character. It stops being a store of value and becomes a tool of survival. This is not about ideology or politics. It's about arithmetic. When one system dominates global trade, it accumulates power quietly. When alternatives emerge, that power doesn't fade gradually. It fractures. And when it fractures, the costs are pushed outward onto savers, workers, and anyone holding the old promises. It's not what most people expect. They think collapses come from invasion or catastrophe. In reality, they come from policy choices, incentives, and delay. That's not theoretical. That's documented history. At first, leaders deny anything is wrong, but then settlements shift, reserves diversify, trust erodes. By the time the public notices, the real decisions are already irreversible. Let me show you how this played out 3 times before, across different centuries and different empires, and why the same sequence is unfolding again right now. Let's start with the Spanish Empire. In the early 1500s, Spain was the richest power the world had ever seen. After the conquest of the Americas, silver from Potosi and Zacatecas flooded Europe. By 1550, Spanish-controlled mines were producing more than 150 tons of silver per year. By 1600, that figure had doubled. Silver became money, and Spain controlled the tap. On paper, this made Spain unstoppable. In reality, it planted the seeds of collapse. At first, the inflows felt like a miracle. King Charles V, and later King Philip II, could finance wars across Europe without raising taxes at home. Armies marched in Italy, the Low Countries, and the Mediterranean. Spain didn't need a productive economy. It could import everything. By 1560, more than 80% of manufactured goods consumed in Spain were produced elsewhere. Why build when silver paid the bills? Cause and effect were already locked in. By 1557, the first cracks appeared. Spain defaulted on its debt for the first time. Then again in 1575, and again in 1596. Each default followed the same logic. Military spending rose. Silver shipments were pledged in advance to foreign bankers, especially the Fugger family in Germany. When shipments arrived late or were intercepted, the entire financial structure froze. Credit vanished overnight. Soldiers went unpaid. Markets seized. This is where the pattern truly begins. Instead of adjusting, Spain doubled down. Philip II believed control of money meant control of outcomes. By 1588, the Spanish Armada was launched at enormous cost. Over 130 ships, roughly 30,000 men. The failure wasn't just military, it was financial. The Armada's destruction forced Spain to borrow even more aggressively, pushing future silver revenues further into the hands of creditors. The empire was now spending tomorrow's money to pay for yesterday's wars. Here's the critical detail. The silver itself was destroying the economy it was meant to sustain. As silver flooded Europe, prices rose. Between 1500 and 1650, prices across Spain increased by roughly 400%. Wages did not keep up. Domestic production collapsed further. Inflation made Spanish goods uncompetitive, locking the country into permanent dependence on imports. The more silver arrived, the weaker the economy became. Cause led directly to effect. By 1600, Spain was producing almost nothing of strategic value. It imported food, weapons, ships, and textiles. Silver wasn't investment capital, it was consumption fuel. And when the flow slowed, even briefly, the system broke. In 1627, Spain defaulted again, then again in 1647. Each default rippled across Europe, triggering banking crises in Genoa, Antwerp, and Amsterdam. Spain wasn't just collapsing internally, it was exporting instability. But here's where it gets worse. As confidence in Spanish finances eroded, lenders demanded higher interest rates. To compensate, Spain pledged even more future silver. This feedback loop accelerated decline. By 1650, silver output from Potosi had fallen sharply due to depleted veins and labor shortages. Revenues dropped. Obligations didn't. The math no longer worked. Military power followed the same trajectory. The 30 Years' War drained remaining resources. In 1648, Spain formally recognized Dutch independence, losing one of its richest territories. In 1659, the Treaty of the Pyrenees ceded land to France. These weren't isolated defeats, they were financial consequences. Armies collapse when money systems fail. By 1700, the outcome was undeniable. Spain was no longer a dominant power. Its population had stagnated, its industries were hollow, its currency had lost credibility. The silver that once made Spain rich had financed its own destruction. Control over money had replaced productivity, and when confidence vanished, nothing remained to hold the system together. This is what the phenomenon looks like in practice. A dominant monetary position creates the illusion of permanence. Easy financing replaces hard choices. Production declines, debt rises, confidence erodes, and when the underlying flow stops or shifts, collapse is not gradual. It is sudden, mathematical, and irreversible. Let's jump forward nearly 3 centuries. Britain. At its peak in 1870, the British Empire controlled roughly 25% of the world's land surface and governed more than 400 million people. London was the financial capital of the world. The pound sterling settled most global trade. British banks financed railways in India, mines in Africa, and factories across Latin America. Just like Spain, Britain believed its monetary dominance was permanent. At first, the system looked unbreakable. By 1900, over 60% of global trade invoices were denominated in pounds. Britain ran persistent trade deficits, but it didn't matter. Capital flowed back through empire and finance. The City of London recycled global savings into British debt. Cause and effect worked in Britain's favor. As long as the pound was trusted, Britain could live beyond its productive capacity. But the same mistake that destroyed Spain was already taking shape. Industrial leadership slipped quietly. By 1913, the United States had overtaken Britain in steel production, producing 31 million tons compared to Britain's 7.7 million. Germany surpassed Britain in chemicals and engineering. British factories aged. Investment shifted from domestic industry to overseas finance. Just like Spain, Britain chose money over production. Then came the shock. World War I. Between 1914 and 1918, Britain spent more than $9 billion on the war effort, an astronomical sum at the time. To pay for it, Britain abandoned the gold standard in 1914 and borrowed heavily from the United States. By 1919, Britain owed America over $4 billion, roughly $70 billion in today's money. The empire survived the war, but the financial foundation was cracked. Here's where the pattern truly begins to repeat. In 1925, under Chancellor of the Exchequer, Winston Churchill, Britain returned to the gold standard at the pre-war parity. The decision was meant to restore confidence. Instead, it strangled the economy. The pound was overvalued by an estimated 10%. Exports collapsed. Unemployment exceeded 10% throughout the late 1920s. Sound familiar? Confidence was prioritized over reality. The system broke in stages. In September 1931, Britain was forced off the gold standard again after losing gold reserves at an unsustainable rate. In just weeks, foreign holders dumped pounds. The currency fell sharply. Savings lost value. Britain's role as the world's monetary anchor was finished, even if the symbolism lingered. But here's the critical comparison. Just like Spain, Britain didn't collapse immediately. The empire still existed. The navy still sailed. The illusion of power remained. But the financial core was gone. During World War II, Britain became dependent on American Lend-Lease aid. By 1945, Britain was effectively bankrupt. Its debts exceeded 250% of GDP. The empire was no longer self-financing. The final blow came quietly. In 1947, Britain attempted to make the pound fully convertible. Within weeks, reserves drained. Convertibility was suspended. In 1949, the pound was devalued by 30%. Then again in November 1967, when the pound was cut from $2.80 to $2.40. Millions woke up poor overnight. Different century. Different continent. Identical collapse mechanics. By the 1970s, Britain turned to the International Monetary Fund for assistance. The former center of global finance required emergency loans to stabilize its currency. The pattern had played out again. Monetary dominance had masked industrial decline. Debt replaced production. Confidence snapped. And when it did, adjustment was brutal and irreversible. Just like Spain, Britain believed the rules no longer applied to it. Just like Spain, it was wrong. The pattern didn't care about history or prestige. It only cared about math now. Let's look at the most recent example, one you probably remember, even if you didn't realize what you were watching at the time. the United States dollar system itself and the collapse of Bretton Woods. In 1944, as World War II was still raging, 44 nations met in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire. The outcome was simple and revolutionary. The dollar would be the center of the global monetary system. Other currencies would be pegged to it, and the dollar would be convertible to gold at $35 an ounce. The United States held over 20,000 tons of gold at the time, roughly 70% of global reserves. The system looked unbreakable. At first, it worked exactly as intended. Between 1945 and 1960, global trade expanded at unprecedented speed. Europe rebuilt, Japan industrialized. Dollars flowed everywhere. The United States ran trade surpluses, then modest deficits, supplying the world with liquidity. Confidence was absolute. This was not just money, it was order. But here's what people didn't understand at the time. The system contained the same flaw as Spain and Britain. To supply the world with dollars, the United States had to run deficits, and deficits, over time, undermined confidence. This was identified as early as 1960 by economist Robert Triffin. The warning was clear. The more successful the system became, the faster it would destabilize itself. By the mid-1960s, the math started breaking down. The Vietnam War and Great Society programs expanded U.S. spending dramatically. Federal outlays rose from $92 billion in 1960 to $196 billion by 1968. Dollars flooded global markets. Foreign central banks accumulated claims on U.S. gold far exceeding what could realistically be redeemed. By 1965, U.S. gold reserves had fallen below 15,000 tons. Confidence was eroding quietly. Then came the acceleration. In 1967, Britain devalued the pound. That single act triggered a wave of doubt about fixed exchange rates. France, under President Charles de Gaulle, began converting dollars into gold aggressively. By 1971, U.S. gold reserves had fallen to just 8,133 tons. Meanwhile, foreign dollar claims exceeded $60 billion, more than 3 times the value of the remaining gold. The system was mathematically insolvent, and then it happened. In August 1971, over a single weekend, President Richard Nixon closed the gold window. Dollar convertibility ended. Bretton Woods collapsed instantly. No long transition, no gradual adjustment. One announcement, one decision. The foundation of global money changed overnight. Here's what should really concern you. The collapse didn't unfold over centuries like Spain. It didn't even take decades like Britain. The final break happened in days. Markets reopened under a completely different reality. Currencies floated, inflation surged. Between 1971 and 1980, U.S. consumer prices rose over 110%. Gold went from $35 an ounce to over $800 by 1980. Savings were destroyed in real terms. The pattern was accelerating. The aftermath followed the same script. Confidence had to be rebuilt artificially. In the 1970s, the United States negotiated oil pricing agreements that effectively recycled dollars through global energy markets. This was the birth of the petrodollar system. It stabilized demand, but it didn't fix the core issue. Production had peaked. Deficits became permanent. Debt replaced discipline. Compare the timelines. Spain's collapse unfolded over roughly 150 years. Britain's monetary decline took about 60. Bretton Woods disintegrated in less than a decade once confidence cracked. The pattern was speeding up, and each iteration left less room for recovery. By the early 2000s, the consequences were structural. The United States had become the world's largest debtor nation. In 1980, federal debt stood at $908 billion. By 2000, it reached $5.6 trillion. By 2020, it exceeded $27 trillion. By 2024, it crossed $34 trillion. The numbers weren't just large, they were exponential. Cause and effect were no longer subtle. And yet, just like the previous empires, denial dominated. The belief was that demand for dollars was infinite, that alternatives were impossible, that history had ended. But that's exactly what every system believes right before it breaks. 3 times. 3 dominant monetary systems: Spanish silver, British sterling, the Bretton Woods dollar, different structures, different eras, same sequence, overextension, dependency, confidence loss, abrupt rupture. The pattern didn't slow down, it accelerated. And that acceleration is the most dangerous part, because the faster the system moves, the less warning people get, the less time they have to adjust, and the more severe the consequences become.